Welcome back to Aqua Reads, where we dive deep into the world of captivating short stories. I'm here to take you on another literary journey that'll leave you thinking long after the last word. So get comfortable, maybe grab a cup of tea, and let's begin.
The Dragon's Daughter. Part 1, The Infiltration. The safe house on Jing'an Road smelled of stale cigarettes and the particular desperation of men who'd stopped believing in tomorrow. Hua Mulan sat across from Detective Li Chen, her hands folded on the metal table between them, her expression as readable as a closed book in a locked library. Outside, Shanghai's skyline pressed against the windows like a creditor, demanding payment. "You understand what you're agreeing to," Chen said. It wasn't a question. He'd said it 3 times already. He was the nervous type, capable enough, but prone to rehearsing conversations until they calcified into something barely recognizable as human speech. "I understand," Mulan replied. Her Mandarin carried the flattened vowels of someone who'd learned to blend into crowds, to become the sort of person people forgot they'd seen. The Xiangnu Syndicate is moving money through shell corporations. They're planning to place representatives in the Ministry of Finance. You need someone inside. Chin nodded, adjusting his glasses, a gesture she'd learned meant he was about to say something he'd already decided to regret. "Your military record is exceptional. Combat training, tactical analysis, languages. But this isn't the armed forces. The Xiongnu don't follow rules. They don't recognize regulations or mercy." "I'm aware," Mulan said. What she didn't tell him was that she was more aware than any file could contain. That she'd grown up in the spaces between legality and blood obligation, that she knew the Xiongnu's structure the way some people know their own reflection. That she knew its current leader, Commander Shanyu, with an intimacy that would have ended her career, her freedom, and quite possibly her life, if the wrong people discovered it. She'd joined the military to escape that world. Now she was volunteering to walk back into it. "We have 3 people on the inside already," Chin continued, opening a folder with the careful deliberatio. "N of someone handling something that might explode. Colonel Yao runs a logistics operation. He's been with us for 2 years, though the Xiongnu don't trust him beyond carrying packages. Ling is a communications specialist, embedded in their accounting division. And then there's Qianpa." Mulan's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes, the minute recalibration of someone recalculating odds. "Qianpa is deep," Chen said. "Very deep. He's been undercover for 4 years. The Xiongnu believe he's one of their own, born into the life. But he's also the most likely person Shanyu would ask to evaluate you. He vets new recruits now. Senior position. That means you'll be dealing with someone whose sanity has been under pressure for 48 months. Is he compromised?" "We don't know," Chen admitted. "That's the problem with sending people into places like this. You can't debrief them. Can't maintain regular contact. He surfaces once every 6 months with informati on, and then he disappears back into the dark." Mulan considered this. Undercover officers were peculiar creatures. They developed their own gravity, their own internal logic. Some survived it. Some became so lost in their assumed identities that the line between performance and authenticity wore away to nothing. She'd seen it happen to good people. "When do I start?" she asked. Part 2, The Recruitment. The clinic on Nanjing Road operated under the name Eastern Prosperity Medical Services, which was the sort of transparent lie that somehow worked better than elaborate subterfuge. Everyone knew what it really was. The police knew. The government knew. The Xiongnu knew. But everyone understood that certain fictions needed to be maintained, like a society woman pretending not to notice her husband's mistress at the opera. Mulan came to the clinic with a broken arm and a story. The woman who treated her was called Mushu, though that wasn't her real name. Nothing about her suggested anything as permanent as a real name. She was sharp-faced and sharper-tongued, with the exhausted competence of someone who'd seen enough violence that individual incidents barely registered anymore. She'd worked for the Xiongnu for 8 years, ever since the organization had realized that having medical personnel they controlled was more useful than kidnapping doctors when necessary. Military fracture, Mushu said, running her fingers along Mulan's arm with professional detachment. Defensive break. You were protecting yourself from someone who knew what they were doing. Sparring match, Mulan said. Got overconfident. That'll kill you faster than confidence, Mushu replied. The ones who get killed are always the overconfident ones and the honest ones. You don't strike me as particularly honest. This was Mushu's particular gift, seeing through surfaces the way other people saw through glass. It made her dangerous to work with and invaluable to organizations like the Xiongnu, which operate on the principle that anyone who could afford honesty was someone to be avoided. I'm looking for work, Mulan said carefully. The kind of work where my particular skills might be appreciated. Mushu didn't look up from the X-rays. What skills? I can evaluate people. Predict behavior. Handle situations that need handling. Mulan paused. Quietly. That's incredibly vague, Mushu said, but her tone had shifted, no longer dismissive, now assessor-like. You looking to hurt people or help them? Whoever pays. Mushu smiled, which was the most unsettling thing Mulan had seen all week. Come back when your arm heals. I know someone who might want to meet you. Part 3, The Family. The Xiongnu's headquarters occupied the upper floors of a luxury tower in Pudong, the kind of place where security systems cost more than most people's homes and discretion was coded into the architecture itself. Mulan had been brought here 6 times in the past 3 months, each visit taking her deeper into the organization's structure, building a credibility that was simultaneously true and false. She was good at what she did. That wasn't a lie. She could fight with economical precision, could read tactical situations with the kind of intuition that came from both training and something harder to name. She impressed people. They recommended her upward through the hierarchy. None of them knew they were promoting someone who would eventually dismantle their operations from the inside. It was in one of the secure conference rooms on the 48th floor that she encountered him. Xiongnu sat behind a desk of black glass, the kind of desk that looked like it had been designed to intimidate, and it worked particularly well when the man behind it had Xiongnu's particular gravity. He was in his 50s now, though he carried the physical form of someone who maintained discipline the way other people maintained breathing. His suit was expensive. His hands were steady. And his eyes contained the kind of certainty that came from never having experienced consequences. Mulan had his eyes. She knew this, had known it her entire life, had spent most of her adult life running from this fact. You're the one Mushu's been recommending, Xiongnu said. It wasn't the opening she'd expected, which meant it was exactly the right opening for establishing his dominance in the room. I'm competent, Mulan replied. Mushu values competence. Mushu values loyalty, Shanyu corrected. She's recommending you because she thinks you're loyal to the right things. Money. Security. Survival. Not to abstract concepts like morality or law. He paused, studying her with the kind of attention that suggested he was looking at something that confused him. You have excellent training. Military background. Where? This was the moment where everything hinged. Where the story they'd constructed could collapse if she hesitated, if she showed the slightest crack. Mulan had rehearsed her ANSWER until it lived in her bones. Family business, she said. Training happened young. Questions weren't encouraged. Shanyu nodded slowly, and Mulan watched something shift in his expression, a recognition, perhaps, or a suspicion. The Fa family? The safe house had warned her this might come up. The Fa family was real, or at least real enough, a mid-level operation in Guangzhou that had been dismantled 2 years ago, its members scattered. It was exactly the sort of family Mulan's constructed background would have come from. My mother's family, Mulan said. She could hear her pulse, but she kept her face still. When they fell apart, I needed employment. I was good at being useful to people who needed useful people. Shanyu stood, and Mulan watched his movement, the way his weight transferred, the particular grace of someone who'd trained extensively in combat. She recognized the patterns because she'd learned them the same places he had, though he'd never know that. I have a particular problem, he said, moving toward the window. From this height, Shanghai spread out like a circuit board, all light and connection and latent power. The government is becoming more interested in my operations than I find comfortable. I have someone inside the Ministry of Finance I can use. It would be advantageous to have additional placement. Someone capable. Someone with the kind of combat training that might be necessary if situations became complicated. I'm capable, Mulan said. Yes, Shanyu agreed. But are you trustworthy? This was the question that mattered. This was the question she'd been building an answer to for months. I'm trustworthy to whoever provides security and compensation, Mulan said. I don't have loyalty to abstract things. I have loyalty to people who pay attention to me, who compensate my work fairly, who don't ask me to be stupid. Any organization that provides those things will find me reliable. Shanyu smiled, and it was like watching a predator decide whether to approach or ignore potential prey. I think you might work out, he said. Qianpa will evaluate you further. If he approves, you'll begin operations in 2 weeks. Part 4, The Deep Game. Qianpa was the sort of man who'd become dangerous because he'd been forced to stop being safe. Mulan recognized this in him the moment they met in a private room in a nondescript building in Jing'an, the sort of room that was specifically designed for conversations that needed to leave no trace. You're the new prospect, he said. His Mandarin carried the accent of someone from Jiangxi province, and his face had the particular tightness of someone running a constant internal calculation. Commander Shan Yu thinks highly of you. I'm competent, Mulan said. That's what everyone says, Qianpa replied. And 90% of the time, they're lying. They're desperate people, pretending to be functional because the alternative is admitting that they're out of their depth. Helia. Ned back in his chair, studying her with the kind of attention that suggested he'd been trained specifically in how to identify lies. He probably had been. But you don't strike me as desperate. I'm exactly as desperate as my circumstances require me to be, Mulan said. Not more, not less. Chienpa's expression shifted into something that might have been recognition. That's a more honest answer than I usually get. He paused. I'm going to need you to understand something about this organization. It's not simply a criminal enterprise. It's a family. Messy, violent, sometimes self-destructive, but still a family. People who are part of it develop loyalties that become complicated. Mulan waited. She'd learned that Chienpa was the type who needed to circle his subject matter before approaching directly. The government wants us destroyed, he continued. They'll use informants, infiltrators, legal pressure, violence if necessary. What they won't do is hesitate when they think EY have an advantage. You need to understand this because I need to know if you're going to stay committed when things become difficult. When your loyalty is tested. My loyalty is to my survival, Mulan said. Which requires this organization to be successful. That's not good enough, Chienpa said flatly. Survivors desert sinking ships. I need someone who understands that this organization is worth something beyond personal survival. That it represents something worth preserving. This was the moment where Mulan understood the true cost of what Chienpa had become. For years Undercover hadn't simply corrupted his objectivity, it had converted him into something that believed its own mythology. He'd internalized the Xiongnu's narrative about itself, had begun to see government opposition not as the inevitable consequence of criminal activity, but as injustice that deserved resistance. I can commit to the organization's success, Mulan said carefully. Not because I believe in its mythology, but because committed people are more valuable than people constantly calculating their own escape. Chienpa studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. That's almost honest, he said. It'll have to be sufficient. Part 5, The Architecture of Betrayal. The operation took shape over the following weeks like something emerging from fog, first vague shapes, then gradually sharper detail. Xiongnu had positioned agents within the Ministry of Finance with the kind of patience that suggested he was thinking in terms of decades rather than months. The goal was elegantly simple: create a shadow network of people in key positions, gradually shift procurement decisions and regulatory oversight, turn government resources into assets that could be monitored and manipulated. It was the kind of operation that would take years to fully implement. It was also, Colonel Yao explained during one of their carefully orchestrated safehouse debriefings, exactly the sort of thing that the government was trying to prevent. We need to move up the timeline, Chen said. He'd lost weight since Mulan had last seen him, and his hands shook slightly as he organized documents on the table. We have a window, about 3 weeks. There's a government audit happening. If we can insert you into the team handling it, we might be able to identify all of Xiongnu's placements at once. That's accelerated, Mulan said. Dangerously so, Yao agreed. Yao was older, perhaps 60, with the weathered competence of someone who'd spent 30 years learning how to survive in situations where survival was statistically unlikely. If you're discovered, we can't protect you. The Xiongnu's reach inside government is extensive. You'd be alone. Mulan considered this with the kind of calm that came from having already accepted the possibility. When? 3 days, Chen said. We need you to plant a device in Xiongnu's office. Something that will give us access to his internal communications during He audit window. Once we have that, we can start mapping the entire network. And if I'm caught? No one answered. The absence of an answer was its own kind of answer. Part 6, The Breaking Point. It was Mushu who discovered the planted device, which was either terrible luck or a sign that Mushu's competence exceeded everyone's assessment of it. She found it in the base of a lamp on Shanyu's desk, and she brought it directly to Shanyu with the kind of loyalty that was hard to manufacture convincingly. The interrogation happened in a basement room that was specifically designed for interrogations. Mulan could tell this from the moment she was brought down here, the acoustic qualities, the drain in the floor, the particular thickness of the walls. Places like this had their own grammar of violence. Shanyu sat across from her, and his expression was the most betrayed she'd ever seen it. That was significant. It suggested he'd invested something in her, some version of trust or recognity. On that she'd been too preoccupied to notice. "I thought you were loyal," he said. His voice was quiet, which was far more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. Mulan didn't answer immediately. She was calculating whether lying would extend her life or simply postpone the inevitable. She chose the truth, or at least a version of it. "I was recruited by the government," she said. "Before I came to the Xiangnu. I was supposed to infiltrate you, identify your operations, help them destroy the organization." "And did you?" "Yes," Mulan said. "Until 3 weeks ago, when I stopped reporting information." Shan Yu's expression shifted slightly. "Why?" "Because I realized that the government's plan was to destroy you," Mulan said carefully. "Not to shut down the operation, but to destroy you personally. All of you. Everyone I'd been working with." This was partially true, which made it more credible than a complete fabrication. It was also a terrible gambit, making him believe she had some kin of loyalty to him, when what she actually had was something far more complicated. "Yao was supposed to protect you," Shanyu said. "Colonel Yao was supposed to keep the operation compartmentalized so that even if you were discovered, it wouldn't compromise the overall structure." "Yao made mistakes," Mulan said. "That's not on you." "Mistakes that led to you being sitting across from me in an interrogation room," Shanyu said. He stood, pacing to the opposite side of the room. "Tell me something. In all this time working for me, did you ever consider that loyalty was more than professional obligation?" Mulan didn't answer. She was thinking about genetic predisposition, about inherited patterns of thinking, about whether the ruthlessness she saw in Shanyu was something she'd learned or something she'd been born with. "My daughter would have been your age," Shanyu said quietly. "If she'd survived. She had your competence, your capability for strategic thinking. She also had your particular gift for deception." He looked at Mulan directly. "She died when she was 23 because I made an error in judgment. I trusted the wrong person. I thought I'd learned that lesson, but apparently I hadn't." The room seemed to contract. Mulan could feel her pulse in her throat, could feel the careful architecture of her entire operation trembling beneath the weight of this observation. "I'm going to give you a choice," Shanyu said. "You can give me the government handlers' names and locations. You can help me dismantle their operation the way they tried to dismantle mine. In exchange, you'll walk out of here alive. You'll be part of my organization permanently, and you'll never betray me again." "And if I refuse?" "Then I'll kill you," Shanyu said. His voice had the quality of someone stating objective fact. "And I'll still dismantle the government operation, because Mushu has the device you planted, and I have very effective people who specialize in reverse engineering government protocols." Mulan considered her options. Refuse, and she died here in this room, and the operation collapsed anyway. And she became exactly what she'd been trying to escape, trapped in the family business, bound by blood obligation and criminal conspiracy for the rest of her life. There was a third option, though, one that required her to make a choice about who she actually was beneath all the constructed identities. "I'll give you the information," Mulan said. "But I need insurance." "Insurance?" Shan Yu smiled. It was a terrible smile, full of dark recognition. "You're still thinking like a strategist. I respect that. I need guarantees that I'm not just walking into a different kind of trap," Mulan said. "That my compliance means something beyond breathing for another day." Shan Yu returned to his chair. "What kind of insurance?" "I need you to agree to protect my family," Mulan said. "Everyone I've ever cared about. Everyone the government might use as leverage against me. You give me that, and I give you everything." Shan Yu considered this. Then he nodded slowly. "That seems like a reasonable exchange. Tell me their names." Mulan gave him the names, her mother, her sister, the handful of people she'd let close enough to matter. She watched as he wrote them down, and she understood that she was cementing herself into the organization with this act. Blood obligation. The family called it. Not metaphorical family. Actual family. Part 7, The Uncovering. The government raid happened at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, which was exactly the kind of detail that would eventually appear in files and testimony, but that meant almost nothing in real-time chaos. Armed officers flooded through Shan Yu's headquarters simultaneously from 6 different entry points, supported by tactical teams and cyber warfare specialists who dismantled the organization's security systems in approximately the time it took most people to pour coffee. Mulan was in a government-safe house when it happened, watching on a monitor as the operation she'd helped design unfold with the kind of precision that came from months of preparation. Yao was in custody. Ling was in custody. 17 operatives of varying seniority were in custody. Approximately 40 million yuan in assets had been seized. Shan Yu was not in his office. "Where is he?" Chen demanded. His voice had taken on a quality of controlled panic, which was counterproductive to literally everyone involved. "Unknown," the tactical commander responded. "We've secured the building. We're conducting a systematic search." What they found, eventually, was Shan Yu on the roof of the adjacent building, having used the kind of contingency planning that suggested he'd been preparing for his own capture for years. He had a portable device, encrypted, likely containing duplicates of every file in his organization. He had a gun. And he had already placed the barrel against his temple. By the time the first officers reached him, Mulan watched this on a secondary monitor, watched as government agents screamed instructions he clearly had no intention of following, watched as Shan Yu's expression settled into something that wasn't resignation exactly, but something adjacent to it. Acceptance, perhaps, of consequences that had been chasing him for decades. Then it was over, and he was simply gone, and the world rearranged itself into a configuration that suddenly had significantly less Shan Yu in it. "We need you back on the ground," Chin said immediately. "Full debrief. Everything you know about successor power. Structures, contingency operations, hidden assets." "I need a moment," Mulan said. She wasn't sure what she was asking for permission to do. Grieve, perhaps, which was ridiculous. Shan Yu was a criminal, a murderer, a man who'd orchestrated human suffering with the kind of casual competence usually reserved for the genuinely Evil. He'd also been her father, and she'd watched him die on a monitor while sitting in a government-safe house, which gave her exactly no claim to legitimate emotion that didn't seem to stop her from experiencing it anyway. "I don't have moments for you right now," Chin said. "We have a window to identify and secure remaining assets before the organization attempts to reorganize. You're one of our most valuable intelligence sources right now." "I'm also human," Mulan said quietly. "That's a luxury," Chin replied. He wasn't being cruel about it. He was simply stating fact. Luxuries are things you can afford when you're not in the middle of dismantling organized crime networks. She returned to the debriefing room, and she spent the next 47 hours giving the government every piece of information she'd accumulated about Xiongnu operations. She identified secondary operatives, explained contingency plans, described the structure of asset laundering operations that had been running successfully for more than a decade. She was thorough and precise and exact. What they needed. What she didn't tell them was that Xiongnu, in his final moments, had sent her a message through Mushu. A name. A location. Instructions for accessing accounts that contained enough resources to function comfortably for the rest of her life, without requiring government protection or criminal organization employment. What she didn't tell them was that Xiongnu's final gift was permission to escape. Epilogue, 6 months later. The apartment overlooked the Bund, though not in the ostentatious way that money usually creates when it reaches a certain threshold. It was subtle, good light, quality construction, the kind of place where you could live comfortably without announcing to the world that you were living comfortably. Mulan received visitors infrequently. Chen came by once every few months, bringing updates on how the government's dismantling of the Xiongnu was proceeding. They were reconstructing themselves, as criminal organizations always did, but with significant less efficiency and significantly more internal conflict. Without Xiongnu's particular gravity, the organization was fragmenting. Qianpa disappeared. The government assumed he'd been killed by Xiongnu operatives during the chaos of the raid. Mulan suspected he'd simply walked away from both organizations and into the ordinary world, which might have been a better outcome than anyone deserved. Mushu, unexpectedly, had become something approaching a friend. They had coffee occasionally, and Mushu would make oblique references to the past without ever directly addressing it. She'd survived the organization's collapse by making herself indispensable to the new leadership, which was the kind of practical pragmatism that Mulan understood viscerally. "Your father was a complicated man," Mushu said, the last time they met. Mulan didn't ask how Mushu knew. Mushu was the type who collected information the way other people collected air. Unconsciously and constantly. "Yes," Mulan replied. T. Hat doesn't excuse anything he did," Mushu continued. "I know," Mulan said. "But it might mean you don't have to be entirely defined by it," Mushu said. She stood to leave, finished with whatever purpose this particular meeting had served. That's the thing about inheritance. You get to choose what you keep and what you discard. After Mushu left, Mulan sat at her window, watching the light change across Shanghai's skyline. Somewhere in that city, the government was conducting audits and running operations and systematically pursuing the pieces of the Xiongnu that had escaped the initial raids. Somewhere else, fragments of the organization were reconstituting themselves, learning to operate without the structure that Xiongnu's authority had provided. And here, in this apartment with its expensive windows and its quiet isolation, Mulan sat between those worlds, bearing the weight of having been genuinely loyal to neither of them and having genuinely betrayed both. It was, she thought, exactly what she deserved. It was also exactly what her father had arranged for her, in his final act of paternal consideration. Not rescue, precisely. But something adjacent to it. Permission to exist in the spaces between the systems that had tried to claim her. The city lights intensified as darkness fell, and Mulan sat alone in her apartment, carrying her father's legacy the way all children eventually carry their parents' legacies, incompletely, imperfectly, and with the stubborn determination of someone trying to build something from the wreckage of inherited patterns. Outside, Shanghai continued its complex calculations. Inside, Mulan was finally, perhaps, beginning to calculate her own.
That's a wrap on today's story. If this tale pulled you in like it did me, smash that like button and subscribe for more short stories every week. What should read next? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep those pages turning. Quote.